What are you hiding under that thing? Contraband or just bad hair? That's what the senior flight attendant snarled at the quiet black girl in seat 24A, just seconds before she ripped the silk scarf off her head. She thought she was flexing authority. She had no idea she was assaulting the daughter of the airline's billionaire CEO. What started as a petty racist power trip at 30,000 feet exploded into a scandal that rocked the company to its core, and ended more than one career before the wheels ever touched the ground. The air in the cabin of Orion Air Flight 88 from London Heathrow to New York's JFK was a familiar cocktail of recycled oxygen, faint jet fuel, and the low-humming anxiety of 300 souls suspended 7 miles above the earth. For Imani Sterling, seated in window seat 24A of the economy cabin, it was the smell of home. After a year abroad studying art history in Florence, the sterile scent of an airplane was the final sensory gate before she could once again breathe the chaotic, beloved air of her native New York. She was deliberately inconspicuous. Her attire was simple: comfortable joggers, a well-worn university hoodie, and a beautiful silk headscarf. The scarf, a vibrant tapestry of deep blues and shimmering gold thread, was more than an accessory. It was a gift from her late grandmother, a tangible piece of her heritage, and a comforting presence in the anonymous bustle of international travel. It was wrapped elegantly around her head, covering her braids in a style that was both regal and modest. Imani cherished these moments of anonymity. Being the only child of David Sterling, the formidable CEO of Orion Air, meant a life lived under a microscope. Her childhood was a blur of private jets, 5-star hotels, and the suffocating pressure of being the heir apparent. This year in Italy was her one act of rebellion, a chance to be just Imani, the girl who could spend hours staring at a single Botticelli fresco, not Imani Sterling, the corporate princess. Flying home on a standard commercial ticket in the back of the plane was her final taste of that precious freedom. It was also, as her father had half-jokingly suggested, a way for her to be his eyes and ears on the ground or in the air. The flight attendant in charge of her section was a woman named Claire Vance. Claire was in her late 40s, with a face that seemed permanently etched with a look of mild disapproval. She had been with Orion Air for 22 years, and in her mind this seniority entitled her to a level of deference that modern passengers rarely provided. She moved through the cabin with a practiced, brittle efficiency, her smile never quite reaching her cold, assessing eyes. Claire had been passed over for a promotion to cabin supervisor twice in the last 3 years, a fact that festered within her like a low-grade infection, poisoning her interactions with both colleagues and customers. From the moment Imani boarded, Claire's gaze lingered on her. It wasn't a look of welcome, but one of suspicion. She saw a young black woman in sweats and a hoodie, occupying a window seat, and her mind, a Rolodex of ingrained prejudices, instantly categorized her. The first interaction was minor, a harbinger of the storm to come. Imani was carefully placing her small leather satchel, containing her sketchbook and laptop, under the seat in front of her. "That needs to go in the overhead bin," Claire said, her voice sharp, cutting through the cabin noise. Imani looked up surprised. "Oh, it's quite small and fits perfectly here. The website said one personal item." "I don't care what the website said. I care what I'm saying," Claire snapped, her hand on her hip. "It's a safety hazard. All bulky bags in the overhead." The satchel was demonstrably not bulky. A man across the aisle had crammed a duffel bag twice its size under his seat without a word from the crew. Imani, not wanting to cause a scene, simply nodded. "Of course, my apologies." She stood, retrieved the bag, and found an empty space in the bin above. As she sat back down, she caught the eye of a young, nervous-looking flight attendant, whose name tag read Chloe. Chloe offered Imani a small, apologetic smile before Claire shot her a withering glare, and the younger woman immediately busied herself with checking seat belts. The second interaction occurred during the drink service. Imani was lost in a podcast, her head leaned against the window. "Drink?" Claire's voice was impatient. Imani pulled off her headphones. "Sorry, could I just have some water, please?" Claire poured the water with a sigh that suggested the request was a profound inconvenience. She practically slammed the plastic cup onto Imani's tray table, causing water to slosh over the rim. Not a drop was spilled on Claire, but a few droplets darkened the sleeve of Imani's hoodie. "Oops," Claire said, her tone devoid of any genuine apology. She moved on without offering a napkin. Imani blotted her sleeve with a tissue from her pocket, her brow furrowed. This was more than just a flight attendant having a bad day. This felt targeted. She had seen Claire be perfectly cordial, almost charming to the white couple in the row ahead of her. With Imani, her demeanor was cold, dismissive, and verging on hostile. An older gentleman seated next to her, a kind-faced man with spectacles perched on his nose, leaned over slightly. "Don't you mind her, dear," he whispered. "Some people mistake their uniform for a crown." Imani gave him a grateful smile. "Thank you." He introduced himself as Mr. Henderson, a retired history professor, and they struck up a quiet, pleasant conversation about Florence and art, a welcome distraction from the palpable animosity radiating from the flight attendant. As the flight progressed, Imani did what her father had taught her to do. She observed. She noted the slow response to call buttons in her section compared to others. She saw Chloe, the junior attendant, being constantly berated by Claire over trivial matters, always just out of earshot of the passengers. Claire ran her section not like a customer service professional, but like a petty tyrant on a power trip. The eyes and ears part of her unspoken mission was getting an earful, and her mind was already composing a detailed report for her father. The issues were systemic, a culture of fear among junior staff and a senior employee whose prejudice was impacting service quality. She had no idea that her report was about to shift from a professional critique to a deeply personal testimony. The catalyst was, as it so often is, a small accident. The plane hit a patch of moderate turbulence, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, advising passengers to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. Imani's cup of cranberry juice, which she had just received, tipped over, spilling a sticky crimson river across her tray table and down onto her gray joggers. "Oh, for goodness sake," she muttered, grabbing a handful of napkins to contain the mess. Claire was passing through the cabin, securing the galley for the turbulence. Her eyes locked onto the spill, and for some reason, this minor mishap seemed to enrage her. It was as if all her day's frustrations, her stagnant career, her perceived lack of respect, her general bitterness, had found a single convenient target in seat 24A. "Seriously?" Claire's voice was loud enough to turn heads. "Can you not handle a simple cup?" Imani looked up, stunned by the venom in her tone. "It was the turbulence, I didn't—" "There's always an excuse," Claire sneered, yanking a wad of paper towels from her apron. She began wiping the tray table with aggressive, furious strokes. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. No consideration." Mr. Henderson intervened. "Now hold on. It was the turbulence, madam. It shook us all." Claire ignored him, her focus entirely on Imani. As she wiped, she accidentally knocked her elbow into Imani's head. "Ow!" Imani flinched, more from the shock than the pain. "Watch yourself," Claire hissed, her face inches from Imani's. "You just hit me," Imani said, her voice low but firm, her patience finally evaporating. And that's when Claire's gaze fixed on the beautiful blue and gold headscarf. In her warped perception, it wasn't a piece of cultural heritage or a fashion choice. It was a symbol of defiance, of otherness. It was the final provocation. "And what is this ridiculous thing anyway?" she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "We have rules about head coverings. How do we know what you're hiding under there?" "It's a security issue." The accusation was so absurd, so nakedly prejudiced, that the entire section fell silent. Chloe, who was standing nearby, looked horrified, her face pale. Mr. Henderson's mouth was agape. Imani's heart pounded. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "It's a headscarf," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's a piece of silk. It's not against any airline policy." She knew the policy, of course. She had helped her father's team redraft it 2 years ago to be more inclusive. Claire let out a short, ugly laugh. I am the policy on this aircraft, and I want to see what's under it. Take it off. No, Imani said, her voice gaining strength. Absolutely not. You have no right. For Claire, this was the ultimate challenge to her authority. This passenger, this girl she had already dismissed and demeaned, was now openly defying a direct order. The rage she had been nursing for years boiled over, consuming all reason, all professionalism, all humanity. In a swift, vicious movement that no one saw coming, Claire reached out, grabbed a handful of the silk scarf, and yanked. The fabric tore. The knot her grandmother had taught her to tie came undone. The scarf, her beautiful, beloved scarf, was ripped from her head. Her braids, neatly tucked away, tumbled down around her shoulders. A collective gasp filled the cabin. The sound of the tearing silk seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence. Imani sat frozen, her hand flying to her now bare head. It was a violation so profound, so intimate, it felt like a physical blow to her soul. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and immediate. It wasn't just about a scarf. It was about her identity, her dignity, her grandmother's memory, all desecrated in an instant by an act of pure, unadulterated hate. Across the aisle, Mr. Henderson, the retired professor, had already discreetly lifted his phone. The lens was steady, the red recording light glowing softly in the dim cabin light. He was no longer just a kind witness, he was documenting a crime, and the storm had finally broken. The silence that followed the ripping of the scarf was a living entity. It was thick with shock, studded with the sharp intake of breaths from a dozen passengers. For Imani, the world had narrowed to a single, searing point of humiliation. The torn fabric lay in Claire's hand, a crumpled casualty of her rage. Imani's own hands trembled as she touched her braids, feeling the sudden, unwelcome exposure. The air felt cold on her scalp. Claire, seeing the stunned faces around her, seemed to realize for a fleeting second that she had crossed a line. But instead of contrition, a defensive fury took its place. She threw the tattered scarf onto Imani's lap. There, she spat, her voice trembling with adrenaline. See? Nothing to hide. Now you'll follow the rules. But Imani was no longer the quiet student. The shock was already crystallizing into a cold, hard resolve. Her tears had stopped, and her eyes, when she lifted them to meet Claire's, were like chips of obsidian. You assaulted me, Imani said, her voice dangerously quiet. The entire row could hear her, and the rows behind leaned in. You have no authority, no right, and no justification for what you just did. I have every right, Claire shot back, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. I am senior crew on this flight. I am responsible for safety and security. You were being defiant. She was doing nothing of the sort. Mr. Henderson's voice boomed from the adjacent seat, making Claire jump. I have witnessed your behavior towards this young lady since she boarded. It has been unprofessional, hostile, and utterly unwarranted. What you just did was not a security measure, it was an assault. And I, for one, am an official witness. From the back of the section, another voice piped up. He's right. We all saw it. It was disgusting. Claire's face, already flushed, turned a blotchy, furious red. She was losing control, and she knew it. She turned her ire on the only person she thought she could still intimidate. Chloe! Get the captain, now! Tell him we have an unruly, non-compliant passenger in 24A. Chloe stood rooted to the spot, her eyes wide with terror. She looked from Claire's contorted face to Imani's dignified, steely composure. She saw the torn scarf. Doing what Claire asked felt like a betrayal of her own conscience. Chloe, did you hear me? Claire shrieked. Hesitantly, Chloe nodded and scurried towards the front of the plane, her movements stiff with conflict. Imani took a deep breath, composing herself with a grace that seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. She carefully picked up the 2 pieces of her grandmother's scarf, her fingers tracing the ragged tear. The gold threads seemed to weep under her touch. She folded them gently, reverently, and placed them in her satchel. She did not try to cover her head again, She would not hide the evidence of what had been done to her. A few minutes later, Captain Miller arrived. He was a man in his late 50s with a stern jaw and an air of beleaguered authority. He was a pilot's pilot, excellent in a storm, but less adept at navigating the turbulent emotions of his passengers. He saw a commotion, and his first instinct was to quell it as quickly as possible. He was met by Claire, who immediately launched into a frantic, self-serving version of events. "Captain, thank God. This passenger," she said, gesturing to Imani, was refusing to comply with safety regulations. She was wearing an unauthorized head covering, became verbally abusive when I asked her to remove it, and was causing a disturbance. Captain Miller looked at Imani, his expression hardening. "Miss, I need you to understand that the flight crew's instructions are not optional." Imani met his gaze without flinching. "Captain, your flight attendant is lying. She targeted me from the moment I boarded. She verbally harassed me, and then she physically assaulted me by ripping my headscarf from my head. I have never been non-compliant. I simply refused her unlawful demand to remove a personal item of religious and cultural significance." "Religious?" Claire scoffed. She was listening to pop music on her headphones. "My faith and my taste in music are not mutually exclusive," Imani replied coolly, "nor are they any of your business." The captain was now caught between a senior crew member he had flown with for years and a passenger who, while articulate, fit a certain profile in his by-the-book mind. He sighed, wanting this to be over. "Look, things have clearly gotten heated," he said, directing his words to Imani. "Perhaps your scarf was not in compliance." "Captain," Mr. Henderson interjected, his voice firm. "With all due respect, you are being misinformed. Your crew member, Miss Vance, is the aggressor here. She initiated every confrontation. What she did was an act of public humiliation and bigotry. I have the entire incident on video." That last sentence hung in the air. Claire's face went white. Captain Miller's eyes narrowed. "Sir, recording the crew is against policy," he began. "Protecting myself and documenting an assault is my right," Mr. Henderson countered. "And I will gladly show this footage to the Port Authority Police, the FAA, and any news outlet that will listen the moment we land at JFK." The captain was cornered. A formal complaint was one thing. Viral video evidence was a corporate catastrophe. He shot a furious look at Claire, who suddenly looked less like a victim and more like a liability. "Okay," he said, his tone shifting. He was now in damage control mode. "Let's all just calm down. Miss," he said to Imani, "I apologize for the misunderstanding. Perhaps we can find you another seat somewhere more comfortable for the remainder of the flight." He was offering a plaster for a gaping wound. He still hadn't truly grasped the severity of the offense. He was trying to manage a customer service issue. Imani saw it clearly. He wasn't on her side. He was on the side of Orion Air, trying to sweep this under the rug as quietly as possible. The offer of a new seat felt like an insult, a way to move the problem out of sight. "No, thank you, Captain," Imani said, her voice ringing with clarity. "I will not be moved. I will remain in the seat I paid for. But I want to be very clear about what I expect to happen when we land. I expect to be met by ground security and the highest-ranking Orion Air official at the airport. I will be filing a formal assault complaint with the police, and I will be filing a grievance with the airline that I expect to be taken with the utmost seriousness." Her confidence was startling. Captain Miller, accustomed to dealing with irate but ultimately powerless passengers, was taken aback. This young woman spoke with an authority that belied her simple clothes and economy-class ticket. "All proper procedures will be followed, miss," he said stiffly. He then turned to Claire. "Claire, you will work the rear galley for the rest of the flight. Chloe will take over this section. Do not interact with any more passengers. Is that understood?" Claire, trembling with a mixture of rage and fear, could only nod, shooting a look of pure hatred at Imani before retreating down the aisle. The captain gave Imani a final curt nod and returned to the cockpit, his mind racing. He had to radio ahead, report a passenger dispute that might involve police. It was a mountain of paperwork and a headache he didn't need. He still, however, fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the earthquake that had just occurred. He believed he was managing a tremor. He had no idea he was standing at the epicenter. As Chloe took over, her hands were shaking. She approached Imani's row to collect the remnants of the spilled juice. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her eyes full of genuine remorse. What she did was wrong. I was too scared to say anything. Imani looked at the young woman and saw not an accomplice, but another victim of Claire's bullying. "It's okay, Chloe," she said softly. "I understand, but when we land, I'll need you to tell the truth about what you saw." Chloe bit her lip, her fear warring with her conscience. After a long moment, she gave a small, determined nod. "I will." For the last 3 hours of the flight, an uneasy truce settled over the cabin. Passengers in the section spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing at Imani with expressions of sympathy and awe. Imani herself remained preternaturally calm. She opened her laptop, not to watch a movie or listen to music, but to write. She typed furiously, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She documented every microaggression, every hostile word, every detail of the assault. She quoted Claire's slurs, described the captain's dismissive attitude, and noted Chloe's fear. It was not just a complaint, it was an indictment. As the plane began its final descent into New York, the familiar skyline appearing through the clouds, Imani felt a strange sense of calm. The girl who had boarded this plane in London, seeking a final few hours of anonymity, was gone. In her place was Imani Sterling, daughter of the CEO, yes, but more importantly, a woman who had just been handed a powerful, painful, and deeply personal reason to enact the very changes her father had talked about for years. She sent a single encrypted text message. It was short and to the point. "Flight OA88, code red, meet me at the gate. No fanfare, just Ken Matthews and the head of in-flight services. We have a problem." The recipient was her father, David Sterling. The message landed in his phone just as he was sitting down for a board meeting. He read it, and his blood ran cold. Code red was their emergency signal, reserved for dire personal or professional crises. It had only been used once before, when Imani had been hospitalized with appendicitis in Florence. He stood up abruptly, his face grim. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid something has come up. We'll have to postpone." He walked out of the boardroom, already dialing Ken Matthews, his stern, fiercely loyal head of North American operations. The storm had made landfall, and the reckoning was about to begin. The moment the wheels of Orion Air Flight 88 touched down on the tarmac of JFK International Airport, a subtle but significant chain of events was set in motion. While Captain Miller was guiding the Airbus A330 towards its gate, a series of urgent encrypted communications were already crackling between the airport's control tower, Orion Air's ground control, and a few very important, very nervous executives. Inside the cabin, the usual post-landing ritual began. The chime sounded, seatbelts unbuckled, and people began to stand, eager to escape the metal tube. But a palpable tension remained around row 24. Claire Vance, who had been hiding in the rear galley, emerged with a face like thunder, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Captain Miller's voice came over the PA, but his standard farewell speech sounded strained. He made one final, crucial announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain in your seats for a few moments. We need to allow some passengers to disembark first." This was unusual. A low murmur went through the cabin. Most assumed it was for a medical issue or a tight connection. Claire shot a triumphant, knowing look towards Imani. She clearly believed the unruly passenger was about to be escorted off by police, a final, vindicating act in her twisted narrative. Imani remained seated, her expression unreadable. She saw Chloe giving her a worried look, and she offered a small, reassuring nod. Mr. Henderson, next to her, had his phone tucked away, but he was ready. He had already airdropped the video file to his personal cloud storage for safekeeping. The jet bridge connected with a dull thud. The cabin door hissed open. The first people to board, however, were not Port Authority police officers. They were two men in impeccably tailored dark gray suits. The first was Ken Matthews, Orion Air's head of North American operations, a man with a reputation for being a corporate shark, his face a permanent mask of intense focus. The second was Robert Pullman, the global head of in-flight services, who had flown in from Chicago that morning. Both men looked grim and deeply anxious. They walked past the first class and business cabins, their eyes scanning the seat numbers. Captain Miller and the cabin supervisor met them at the entrance to the economy section, their faces a mixture of confusion and apprehension. "Ken, Robert, what's this about?" the captain asked. "We had a minor passenger dispute. I was handling it." Ken Matthews held up a hand, cutting him off. His gaze was icy. "Your handling of it is precisely why we're here, Captain. Stand aside." The two executives continued down the aisle, their expensive shoes silent on the carpeted floor. They were followed by two members of the airport's official ground security team. The passengers watched, utterly bewildered. The men stopped at row 24. Ken Matthews' severe expression melted away the moment he saw Imani. It was replaced by one of profound concern and deference. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Are you all right?" The name dropped into the cabin's atmosphere like a 10-ton weight. Sterling, as in David Sterling, the CEO. The name emblazoned on the side of the very plane they were sitting in. A wave of understanding, followed by sheer shock, rippled through the nearby passengers. Whispers erupted. "Sterling? Did he say Sterling? The CEO's daughter? No way." Claire Vance, who had been watching from a few rows back, felt the blood drain from her face. Her skin went cold and clammy. Sterling. It couldn't be. The girl in the hoodie and joggers, the girl she had belittled, harassed, and assaulted, was the heir to the entire Orion Air empire. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every ounce of her prejudice came rushing back to her, now recast not as an assertion of authority, but as a career-ending, life-altering act of self-destruction. Captain Miller looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His by-the-book de-escalation, his siding with his senior crew, his dismissive apology to Imani, he replayed it all in his head, but now he saw it through the terrifying lens of what he had done. He hadn't just mishandled a complaint. He had failed the CEO's daughter. Imani looked up at Ken Matthews. "I'm physically unharmed, Ken. Thank you for coming." Her voice was calm, but carried an undeniable weight. She then looked past him, her eyes finding Claire. Their gazes locked for a split second. In Imani's eyes, there was no triumph, only a deep, profound disappointment. In Claire's, there was pure, unadulterated terror. "Miss Vance, Captain Miller," Robert Pullman, the in-flight services head, said, his voice dangerously soft. "You will both hand over your crew IDs and passports. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. You will be escorted off this aircraft to a secure office where you will give your preliminary statements. Do not speak to each other. Do not speak to anyone." Claire began to hyperventilate. "No, it was a misunderstanding. I thought..." She stammered, her carefully constructed reality shattering into a million pieces. "Be silent," Ken Matthews commanded, his voice like a whip crack. His earlier concern for Imani was gone, replaced by a cold fury directed at the crew. The security team stepped forward. One motioned for Claire, the other for Captain Miller. The captain, pale and shaken, complied immediately, his professionalism a thin veneer over his shock. Claire, however, seemed to crumble. Her legs buckled slightly, and she leaned against a seat for support, muttering, "My career, my 22 years." Imani stood up. "Mr. Henderson," she said, turning to the man beside her, "I cannot thank you enough. Would you be willing to provide your video and a statement to Mr. Matthews and Mr. Pullman?" Mr. Henderson, though stunned by the revelation of Imani's identity, nodded firmly. "It would be my honor, young lady. Justice must be served." Imani then looked at Chloe, who was standing by the galley, looking as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "Chloe," Imani said, her voice softening, "it's all right. All I need you to do is tell them exactly what you saw. The truth will be enough." Chloe looked at the powerful executives, then at Imani, and finally at the disgraced Claire being led away. She took a deep breath and nodded, tears of relief and fear mingling in her eyes. "Yes, Miss Sterling, I will." As Imani, Ken, and Robert prepared to disembark, a passenger from the row behind spoke up. "That flight attendant. She deserved that. What she did was horrible. We'll all give statements if you need them." A chorus of agreement followed. The entire section had become a crowd of witnesses, united in their disgust for Claire's actions. Ken Matthews nodded. "Thank you. An airline representative will be here to take your contact details. You will all be compensated for the disturbance." Imani, flanked by the two senior executives, walked off the plane. She didn't look back. As she stepped into the jet bridge, the flash of a phone camera went off from the terminal window. Someone had seen the commotion and recognized the executives. The story was already starting to leak. They didn't go to the main terminal. They were led to a discreet VIP lounge reserved for high-level staff and dignitaries. Inside, waiting on a plush leather sofa, was her father. David Sterling was not a man given to overt displays of emotion. He was a titan of industry, known for his steely demeanor. But when he saw Imani, his face softened with a father's love and worry. He stood up and enveloped her in a hug. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm okay, Dad," she whispered into his shoulder, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the ordeal. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "But the airline isn't—" He pulled back, his expression turning grim. "I know. I've seen the preliminary report from the captain and the frantic messages from Ken. Tell me everything." For the next hour, Imani recounted the entire flight, from the first snide comment about her bag to the final violent act of ripping her scarf. She was clear, concise, and unflinching. She presented her detailed notes, the ones she had typed on the plane. David Sterling listened in silence, his anger a palpable force in the room. It was a quiet, cold fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting rage. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "The systemic rot is deeper than I thought," he said finally. "Claire Vance is a symptom. The disease is a culture that allowed her to fester for 22 years. The captain's failure to see a clear case of assault for what it was. That's an institutional failure." He looked at his daughter, at the strength in her eyes that mirrored his own. "This isn't just about firing a flight attendant and a captain. This is a watershed moment for Orion Air. This is where we either become another corporate cautionary tale or we burn it all down and rebuild it right." Just then, Ken Matthews re-entered the lounge, his phone in his hand, his face pale. "David," he said, "we have a problem. Mr. Henderson's video. Someone must have sent it to a news aggregator. It's online. It's already got 50,000 views. The title is, 'Orion Air Flight Attendant Violently Attacks Black Passenger.'" David Sterling didn't flinch. He looked at Imani, then back at Ken. "Good," he said, his voice like ice. "Let them see. Let the world see who we were, because I'm about to show them who we are going to become. Get our PR team. Get our legal team. I'm calling an emergency press conference for tomorrow morning. And my daughter," he said, placing a proud hand on Imani's shoulder, "is going to be right there with me." The hard karma had begun. It was not just coming for Claire Vance. It was coming for the entire airline. The video was a firestorm. Shot from the steady hand of Mr. Henderson, it was raw, undeniable, and utterly damning. It captured the venom in Claire's voice, the absurd accusation of her hiding something, Imani's firm but calm refusal, and the shocking, violent rip of the scarf. It was less than 60 seconds long, but it was 60 seconds of pure corporate poison. By the time the sun rose over New York City, the video was not just viral. It was a global phenomenon. #Orion Air Assault, #Justice for Imani, and #Fire Claire Vance were trending worldwide. News outlets from CNN to the BBC had picked it up, playing the clip on a loop. Orion Air's meticulously crafted image of premium-friendly service was being torched in real time. The initial statement from Orion Air, a hastily written piece of corporate jargon about investigating an incident and taking matters seriously, was torn to shreds by the public. It was seen as weak, insufficient, and insulting. The company's stock, when the market opened, plummeted by 9% in the first hour of trading, a loss of over $400 million in market value. Inside the Orion Air corporate headquarters, it was chaos. The legal department was inundated with calls. The PR team was in full-blown meltdown. Sponsors and corporate partners were threatening to pull their contracts. While the corporation reeled, the personal reckoning for Claire Vance and Captain Miller was swift and brutal. Claire's interview, conducted in a sterile, windowless room at the JFK corporate offices, was a disaster. She entered with a misplaced sense of defiance, still clinging to the belief that her 22 years of service would shield her. She was met by Ken Matthews, Robert Pullman, and a stone-faced senior lawyer from the airline's general counsel. She began with her practiced lies. The passenger was agitated and non-compliant. I was following security protocols. She became aggressive. The lawyer simply slid a tablet across the table. Miss Vance, this is footage from the incident. We also have sworn, notarized statements from 9 other passengers and 2 of your fellow crew members, including Miss Chloe Jensen. Would you like to revise your statement? Claire watched the video. She saw her own face, contorted with a rage she barely recognized. She heard her own voice, shrill and hateful. She saw the gasp of the passengers, the shock on Imani's face. The foundation of her self-deception crumbled. She began to cry. Not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. I've given this company my life. 22 years. I've had a perfect record. 1 mistake, 1 bad day. 1 mistake, Robert Pullman interjected, his voice dripping with disdain. Our preliminary review of your file shows 17 informal passenger complaints against you in the last 5 years, all for rude and aggressive behavior. All of them were smoothed over by your previous supervisor, who has since been fired. Your perfect record is a lie. Your bad day was simply the day you got caught. The final nail in the coffin was Chloe's testimony. The young flight attendant, speaking to the investigators with Imani's quiet encouragement fresh in her mind, detailed not just the assault, but the months of bullying, the constant microaggressions, and the toxic work environment Claire cultivated. She was the voice of every junior employee who had ever been afraid of a senior tyrant. Claire Vance was terminated for gross misconduct, effective immediately. Her severance was voided. Her pension was frozen pending legal review. A note was placed in her permanent file that would effectively blacklist her from ever working for a major airline again. As security escorted her from the building, she was a broken woman, but not a repentant one. She was a victim in her own eyes, undone by a world that had, she believed, conspired against her. Captain Miller's fate was different, but no less severe in a professional sense. His interview was a somber affair. He didn't lie, but he did try to justify his actions through the lens of protocol. My priority was the safety of the flight and de-escalation. I was given false information by a trusted senior crew member. Your priority, Captain, the lawyer stated coolly, is the safety and well-being of all passengers. You witnessed a potential hate crime and treated it as a customer service inconvenience. You failed to protect the victim. You failed to properly investigate. You sided with the aggressor. That is not a failure of protocol. It is a failure of judgment. Captain Miller was not fired. Firing a senior pilot with an otherwise exemplary flight record would be difficult and legally messy. Instead, he was grounded indefinitely. He was stripped of his captaincy and demoted. To ever fly for Orion Air again, he would have to undergo a 6-month unpaid retraining program, including extensive courses on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, implicit bias, and conflict resolution. It was a humiliating fall from grace, a message to every other pilot in the fleet that turning a blind eye was not an option. But the real karma, the hard karma, was not just about 2 employees. It was about the entire corporation. And David Sterling was about to be its instrument. The next morning, he stood before a wall of cameras at the announced press conference. The room was packed. He was not flanked by lawyers or PR handlers. He was flanked by his daughter, Imani. Imani was no longer the anonymous student. She was dressed in a sharp, elegant business suit, her braids styled in a graceful updo. She wore no headscarf. Her presence was a powerful, silent statement. David Sterling stepped to the microphone. He looked tired, but his eyes burned with intensity. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "Yesterday, on one of our flights, a passenger was subjected to a horrific, unprovoked assault by a member of our crew. That passenger was my daughter." A wave of murmurs and camera flashes swept the room. "But that fact is irrelevant," he continued, his voice rising. "She should not have to be my daughter to be treated with basic human dignity. The uniform of an Orion Air employee is not a license for bigotry. The seat on our plane is not a stage for abuse. We failed. I failed. Our culture failed. And for that, I offer my deepest, most profound and unreserved apology to Imani and to every single passenger who has ever been made to feel unwelcome or unsafe by our staff." He then laid out the hurricane of consequences. Effective immediately, Claire Vance has been terminated. Captain Miller has been grounded and demoted. But this is not enough. This is not about 1 or 2 bad apples. It's about the entire orchard. He announced the Imani Initiative, a top-to-bottom $10 million overhaul of Orion Air's corporate culture. First, all 15,000 global employees, from baggage handlers to the board of directors, would be required to undergo a new mandatory and rigorous DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion training program, designed by leading experts. Second, a new independent civilian complaint review board was being established, giving passengers a direct and powerful channel to report misconduct, with real investigative power. Third, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment was being implemented, with immediate suspension as the minimum penalty. Fourth, he announced the creation of a new executive position, Chief Culture and Experience Officer. This person would report directly to the CEO and have the power to enact systemic change across the entire company. Then came the final twist. "The board has approved my recommendation for this new role," David said, his voice filled with pride. "The first Chief Culture and Experience Officer of Orion Air will be the woman who inspired this change, the woman who showed grace and strength in the face of ugliness, and the woman who understands better than anyone what our customers deserve. My daughter, Imani Sterling." He stepped aside and gave the podium to Imani. She looked out at the sea of faces, her gaze steady. "What happened to me was not unique," she began, her voice clear and strong. "It was just uniquely visible. My goal is not punishment, it is prevention. My mission is to help build an airline where everyone of every race, faith, and background feels not just safe, but truly welcome. Where a headscarf is seen not as a threat but as what it is, a piece of fabric or a piece of faith, or a piece of a person's beautiful identity. The work will be hard, it will be uncomfortable, but it is necessary, and it starts today." The press conference was a masterstroke. It transformed a PR disaster into a story of accountability and redemption. It was honest, brutal, and hopeful. The news cycle shifted from attacking the airline to cautiously praising its response. The stock, which had been in free fall, began to stabilize. The karma had hit. It had been swift for Claire, humiliating for the captain, and transformative for the entire company. It wasn't just about losing a job. It was about a powerful corporation being brought to its knees and forced to confront the poison within its own veins, all because one employee chose to unleash her prejudice on the wrong young woman on the wrong day. 8 months had passed since the day the world came to know Imani Sterling. 8 months since Orion Air had been pushed to the edge of a cliff and forced to look into the abyss of its own making. To an outsider, the changes might have seemed subtle, but for the employees of the airline, the very air they breathed had changed. The new normal was on full display during the pre-flight briefing for Flight 212, a morning departure from JFK to San Francisco. The cabin supervisor stood before her team of 6 flight attendants, her expression warm but focused. It was Chloe Jensen. In the wake of the scandal, her courage and clear-headed testimony had been recognized, fast-tracked through leadership training infused with the principles of Project Nightingale. She was now, at 26, one of the youngest supervisors in the fleet. She was a living symbol of the new Orion Air. "All right, team," Chloe began, her eyes scanning the faces before her. "Our PDS scores from the last rotation were excellent. Passenger feedback highlighted our proactive service in row 34 with the anxious flyer. Great job, Maria. That's exactly what we're aiming for." She tapped a screen displaying their flight manifest. "Today, we have 2 unaccompanied minors, a passenger in 12C with a severe nut allergy, and a family of 5 connecting to Seoul. Let's make sure we are ahead of their needs. Remember the core principle of Nightingale. We're not just providing a service, we're taking on the care of every person who steps through that door. Let's make it a great flight." There was a new energy in these briefings. The fear that Claire Vance had once instilled was replaced by a sense of shared purpose. However, not every heart and mind had been won over. Standing in the back of the group was Gary, a flight attendant with 25 years of service. His posture was perpetually slumped in a state of weary cynicism. To him, this was all a performative charade. Later in the galley during the flight's quiet cruise, he cornered a younger attendant named Ben. "Can you believe this?" Gary muttered, vigorously polishing a coffee pot. "PDS scores, taking on their care. We're not social workers. We're here to pour drinks and make sure they don't open the emergency exit. All this walking on eggshells. I miss the old days when you could just tell someone to sit down and shut up without needing to file 3 reports about their emotional well-being." Ben, a graduate of the first wave of Project Nightingale, shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know, Gary. I think it's better now. People seem happier, we seem less stressed." "Happier?" Gary scoffed. "We're terrified. One wrong word and you're hauled in front of that civilian board nonsense. It's a witch hunt. Just remember, kid, this airline cares about one thing: money. All this dignity stuff will last until a real high roller complains. Then you'll see how fast they toss the new rule book out the window." Gary's cynicism was about to be put to the ultimate test. The incident began, as they often do, with a quiet display of arrogance. In seat 2A of the first-class cabin sat Mr. Alistair Davenport, a private equity magnate with a famously short temper and Orion Air's highest diamond-tier status. He was a million-mile flyer who treated the airline like his personal chariot service. He was being served by a new flight attendant named Kenji, a bright, earnest young man from Japan who spoke precise, if slightly accented English. Mr. Davenport had asked for a specific single malt scotch that, unfortunately, had not been stocked for the flight. "I'm very sorry, sir," Kenji said, bowing slightly. "We do not seem to have that particular brand today. We do have the Glenlivet 18 or the Macallan." Davenport waved a dismissive hand, not even bothering to look at him. "This is unacceptable. I fly this route every week. You know what I drink. Is it that hard? Or is it that you don't understand? Can you please find me someone who speaks English properly?" The barb, delivered with cold condescension, struck Kenji like a physical blow. He froze, his face flushing with humiliation. Chloe, who had been overseeing the first-class cabin, witnessed the entire exchange. The old Orion Air protocol would have been clear: apologize profusely to Mr. Davenport, reprimand the flight attendant for not anticipating the passenger's needs, and offer a mountain of free champagne and air miles. Gary, who was working the first-class galley, saw the look on Chloe's face and shook his head almost imperceptibly, mouthing the words, "Let it go." But Chloe was not a product of the old Orion Air. She remembered the feeling of helplessness as she watched Claire Vance terrorize Imani. She would not let that happen on her watch. She walked calmly to Mr. Davenport's seat. "Sir," she began, her voice even and professional. "My name is Chloe. I'm the supervisor on this flight. I understand you're disappointed about the beverage selection. However, my colleague speaks perfect English and he is a valued member of our crew. Disrespectful language towards our staff will not be tolerated on Orion Air." Davenport stared at her, his mouth agape, as if she'd just slapped him. "Did you just lecture me?" he sputtered. "I am a Diamond Tier member. I spend more on this airline in a month than you make in a year. I don't need a lecture on etiquette from a waitress. I want your name and employee number. You'll be lucky if you're working a regional flight to Buffalo by next week." "My name is Chloe Jensen," she replied, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "And per the passenger and crew Bill of Rights, which is in your seat pocket, creating a hostile environment for the crew or other passengers is grounds for a formal warning. Please enjoy your flight." She turned and walked away, giving Kenji a supportive look as she passed. Gary watched from the galley, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. The gauntlet had been thrown down. Within an hour of landing, Alistair Davenport had filed a furious multi-page complaint, demanding Chloe's immediate termination for unprecedented insubordination and disrespect. The complaint was automatically flagged and sent directly to the Civilian Complaint Review Board. The CCRB convened the following Tuesday. The room was quiet and serious. The retired judge, Judge Miller Thompson, presided. Mr. Henderson, the passenger rights advocate, reviewed the file, his expression grim. They had Chloe's report, a statement from Kenji, and a corroborating email from a woman in seat 3B who had overheard the exchange. "Let's pull Mr. Davenport's file," Judge Miller Thompson said. The file was illuminating. Over the past decade, Davenport had been the subject of 12 similar complaints from crew members, citing verbal abuse, condescension, and demands for special treatment. In every single case, the airline had sided with him, issuing apologies and bonus miles, while the employees received a note in their file to provide more attentive service. Mr. Henderson looked up from the report. "This is the very rot the Imani Initiative was designed to cut out," he said. "For years we've enabled this man's abusive behavior because of his status. The question before us is simple. Do our new rules apply to everyone, or only to those in economy class?" The decision was unanimous. 2 days later, 2 things happened. First, Chloe received a personal call from Imani Sterling. "Chloe," Imani's voice came through the phone, warm and proud. "I just read the CCRB report. I wanted to call you personally and thank you. You were brave, professional, and you embodied everything we want this airline to be. Thank you for protecting your team." The second thing was an official registered letter sent to Alistair Davenport's Park Avenue office. It informed him that after a full review of his complaint and his history with the airline, the CCRB had exonerated Miss Jensen completely. Furthermore, due to his violation of the Bill of Rights, his Diamond Tier status was suspended for 1 year. "Elite status at Orion Air," the letter concluded, "is a privilege built on mutual respect. It is not a shield for abuse." The news of the board's decision spread like lightning through the airline's internal network. For the first time, the crew saw that the new rules had teeth. They saw that management would defend them, even at the risk of losing a wealthy customer. Gary, hearing the news in a briefing room, was utterly silent. The cynical armor he had worn for years had been pierced. The airline had chosen its people over $1 million account. That same week, Captain Frank Miller prepared for his first flight back in the captain's seat. His 6 months of retraining were complete. He was a changed man, quieter, more observant, humbled. His first officer for the flight was a sharp young black woman named Maya. He greeted her with a genuine smile and listened intently during her briefing. As they prepared for takeoff, Captain Miller picked up the microphone for the welcome announcement. He went through the standard information, flight time, weather, and then he paused. "And finally," he said, his voice resonating with a new, quiet authority that had been absent before. "I want to thank you for flying with us. Our shared goal is to get you to your destination safely and on time, in an environment of mutual respect for everyone on board. Thank you for helping us create that space together." He clicked off the microphone. In the quiet hum of the cockpit, he looked out at the vast expanse of the sky. It was the same view he had seen for 25 years. But today, for the first time, the horizon felt truly clear. The echoes of the past were fading, replaced by the steady, promising hum of a new evolution. So, what is the ultimate lesson from the story of Imani Sterling and Orion Air? It's that karma, when it truly hits, isn't just about a single moment of payback. Hard karma is a tidal wave of change. It wasn't just that a hateful flight attendant lost her job, it's that the toxic culture that protected her for 2 decades was exposed and dismantled. It wasn't just that a captain was demoted, it's that an entire system was forced to relearn its definition of duty and care. The story of Flight 88 reminds us that one person's dignity is never a small thing, and that true power lies not in a uniform or a title, but in the courage to demand accountability. A single act of prejudice born in ignorance led to a corporate revolution. If you believe that accountability is non-negotiable and that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of justice and karma served. What did you think of the CEO's response? Let us know in the comments below.